Okay, so hi and welcome to our fifth webinar of the academic year. Today, looking at how we address harmful sexual behaviour through PSHRE. Some of you attending may well be expecting to see Gemma Aitchison. I know we emailed through to say that Gemma was unable to make it today. However, in Gemma's place, Gemma has highly recommended both Tamazin and Michael, who are going to speak to you today on this topic. They come highly recommended through Gemma, and having had a look through their biographies and had a chat with both of them last week, I don't think we could have two better people to come and talk to us about this subject today. It's a subject that's particularly close to my heart. So if there is any questions that you have throughout the course of the webinar, please pop them in the Q&A. I will be monitoring it as Tamazin and Michael are presenting, and I will step in with that question if I feel it's relevant at that point. Otherwise, we will leave them to the end. Okay? Okie dokie. So without further ado, I think Tamazin is going to present to us first. Just got some photographs there introducing us there at the beginning of this webinar, but I'd like to pass over to Tamazin now.
Thank you ever so much. Thank you for inviting us this evening. Really great to meet everyone, and really looking forward to Q&A later. So just a bit about myself. I'm a practitioner. I've been teaching for 22 years. I trained in Wales, taught in England, and now I'm back in Wales, where I'm curriculum lead for health and wellbeing and relationships and sexuality education at a secondary school in South Wales, where I've been for 15 years. I also work as a freelancer. I'm a freelance researcher and consultant, doing any kind of troubleshooting that is needed around health and wellbeing for any setting. Most recent projects have been working with the anti-porn organisation in the US, Culture Reframed, and currently working with a school that has been involved in some of the TikTok things that have been going on with young people unhappy on TikTok. So some really quite diverse work there. I'm just going to put a bit of a health warning on the first slide, because it does have a swear word in it. So just to let you know that that's going to happen. But I thought this was just quite a good place to start today, just a kind of a state of the nation. And that's largely what I'm going to be doing. It's just kind of looking at what is the state of play. We seem to have got a bit of a perfect storm of things that have come together, and I'm just going to give a bit of a state of the nation. I'm then going to pass over to Michael, who's going to really drill down into the what on earth is going on, and then talk a bit about creating like conversations and more cultural conversations. And then I'm just going to have a look at what that might look like in I'm going to say health and wellbeing a few times this evening, sorry, because that's what we call it in Wales, but PSHRE. So there I was flicking through the Guardian at the weekend, and this article was about how some schools have been advised not to talk about Andrew Tate by the Department for Education. And this was one of the quotations. There I was flicking through with my cup of tea and my toast at the weekend, and this was the quotation that really leapt out at me. So yeah, a 9-year-old boy's locking a girl in a cupboard in school and making that threat and forcing her to watch porn video clips. In terms of how on earth did we get here, I think that's an example that kind of illustrates some of the more extreme end of some of the harmful sexual behaviours which we as practitioners are trying to address. But whilst this shocked me, not that much, because whilst I work as a secondary practitioner, I was chatting with a colleague who's in senior management at a primary school, and she spoke about having to intervene when children were going into the Wendy house to do porn to one another, playing porn to one another, and they were children much younger than 9. So we're all very much in it. We're really, as practitioners, there at the deep end. So I just thought someone could get the next slide for me, please. There we are. So what on earth is going on? I can see I've got a bit of some bullet point issues there, sorry. Hopefully it will make sense. So in terms of what's been going on in recent years, we've had the Everyone's Invited project. And if you haven't been on that website, I highly recommend it. So currently it's at 50,046 submissions of children and young people going online to talk about their experiences of harmful sexual behaviour in school. There are currently 2,962 schools named on that site, including around 400 primary schools, which is very, very, I mean, the whole thing is very sobering, but very sobering indeed. From a freedom of information request, made in 2015, there are currently 600, or they were at the time 600 ongoing rape investigations which are alleged to have taken place on school premises. We've then, and gosh, what a 6 months it's been, and I'm sure Michael could tell you all about that, but the online misogynistic influences, which falls within the context of this bizarre online space called the manosphere, which is where disparate groups of men who dislike women, and some men for lots of different reasons, all come together to share tips and hints and so on. But of course, Andrew Tate is, of course, probably the most well known for this year. But whatever happens with Andrew Tate, there are certainly plenty of individuals who are then ready to fill his boots, regardless of what happens in Romania. And within the same article that I talked about at the weekend, one of the organisations that's been working with schools to address issues of Andrew Tate, and of course, you were contacted an awful lot around that time as well, weren't you, Michael? It was getting quite, ridiculous, the number of people reaching out to you for support. But Diversify, who are a Rotherham-based organisation, say they're contacted on average with 25 times a week from primary and secondary schools needing support, believing there to be about 8 young men who are very interested in Andrew Tate's influence in any average class of 30 young people. So whilst Andrew Tate most definitely isn't the cause of it, he's certainly brought a lot of very harmful beliefs around how men and women should interact with one another and what relationships should look like to the surface. Also, as part of this hot mess, we have the proliferation of online pornography. I was just going over again this afternoon the Children's Commissioner's report into young people's experiences of pornography, which was released back in January of this year. I highly recommend looking at it if you haven't. But some of the headline figures, we're thinking that the report found that about the average age of exposure to pornography in the UK is 13 years old. I have certainly read other reports that are as wide scale as the Children's Commissioner's report, which think it might be closer to 12 years old or indeed 10 years old. And by the age of 13, 50% of the children sampled had been exposed to pornography. By age 18, 79% of young people in the survey say they've been exposed to violent pornography. I mean, personally, I believe all pornography is violent, but the fact that they identify this as particularly violent, I think, is very, very interesting. At the same time, however, relationships and sex education, of course, has become compulsory in England, where I am in Wales. It came in 2022. The legislation looks slightly different. But yeah, so we have to be talking about it, and there's no way around it, and young people can only withdraw from part of it. And then, of course, at the same time, we have a review of RSE resources and providers, which has just been commissioned by central government, perhaps suggesting that maybe some of the advice that teachers have been given to address some of these issues, maybe that perhaps wasn't the most appropriate or fit for purpose. Do you mind moving the slides on? Thank you.
Sorry, Tamsin, was that the Sleep at the Wheel document?
No, so this was, at the moment, it's hard to kind of grapple whether it's actually been launched or not, but it was under an MP Miriam Cates. It was said that there was going to be an investigation into the suitability and appropriateness of RSE resources. I don't think it's a project that is named as yet, but it's certainly the RSE has very much been in the headlines of late, hasn't it, in terms of the best way to address these subjects in school.
Yeah, so we have a question came in just about the document Asleep at the Wheel and the likelihood that teachers will have to put all of their lessons and resources online and available for parents. And I think obviously that the Asleep at the Wheel policy document came out on March the 30th. So that's really recent as well. Yeah, so I mean, I think the question just says, what about the document, and what do you think there's a likelihood that we'll have to put all of our lessons and resources online so parents can see them?
Well, the DfE have already said, haven't they, that parents should work very closely with families. And I understand that in response to a parent who wanted access to the resources that were being used in school, there were questions of copyright. So I think it was clarified then that schools should find opportunities for parents to be able to see exactly what is taught, even if it means parents physically going into school to look at resources on site. So yeah, that does sound right. Personally though, before I deliver any RSE, I always send resources home. So I have full transparency. I invite parents and carers into my school 6 times a year for them to be able to talk about the themes. But I also, before I start delivering, I always write an email home so that parents or carers know what's going to be taught. But I also send hyperlinks or descriptions of what I'm going to use. And I do think that is good practice. RSE should always, and I'm going a bit off topic here, but RSE should always be in conjunction with parents and carers. And as I say to parents and carers, I very much see myself as like the backing singer to the work that they are, that they are doing at home. So, but of course, happy to talk about that a bit later on if anyone's got any queries. So in terms of sexually harmful behaviours, these are specifically, of course, the behaviours that we are trying to support learners to recognise if they are the victim, for them to feel empowered to be able to seek out help. But also, given the very bizarre societal and media context in which we're all trying to do our job and in which young people are trying to navigate and get to the other side as fully formed functional adults, these are really the topics that we need to address. So of course, sexual and sexist comments, that probably I would say is the most common that would probably happen on school premises and with students, and even not necessarily recognizing that what they're saying is harmful. Sexist behaviours related to misogynistic influence. So whilst obviously this doesn't come exactly under, in terms of sexual harassment, directly targeting a female member of staff because they are female for behaviours, or directly targeting groups of girls or a girlfriend in a relationship because they are a girl, I think it really is worth exploring. Sexual touching, of course, and sexual harassment, so kind of repeated unwanted sexualized behaviour. Exposure to pornography. So it is, of course, against the law for anyone to be shown pornography under the age of 18. So the laws around porn, hopefully the Online Harms Bill will go some way to addressing this, but they are strange. But as it stands, legislation says that it is against the law, not for young people to see porn, but for anyone to show porn to someone under the age of 18. But pornography, anyone showing pornography to a child is technically non-contact sexual abuse. And it can be extremely, well, let's call it what it is. It's extremely distressing for the recipient and can be very confusing in terms of how they start to conceptualize healthy sexual relationships. Serious sexual assault, of course, and rape, but also then the targeting of young people who have been victimized. So kind of rape apology, making excuses, targeting young people who've experienced things, minimizing what's happened to them, victim blaming. Requesting and sharing of nudes, of course, and then linked to that, the filming or sharing of sexual activity, even if the young person knows about perhaps a recording, and then coercive behaviours as well. And coercive behaviours can, of course, be linked to sexual activity, and I'm sure many people will be aware it's a horrible thing to have to talk about, but young people maybe on a webcam or so on being coerced into showing their body or harming their body online for the sexual gratification of the other person. So that's kind of, as a practitioner, all of the things we're going to we really need to be touching on in lessons in an age appropriate way. What I'm going to do now though is pass on to Michael, who's going to look into kind of like where has all of this come from, and then I'm going to pick up the end and just start to unpick how we explore some of these things in lessons. Okay.
Thanks, Tamsin. I think this slot will be about 20 minutes, but do feel free to just shout, just say stop, because it's very prone to tangential thinking and discussion, which is the nature of the beast. So thanks very much for that, Tamsin. Thank you, Bex and Chloe, for inviting us today. Gemma is a wonderful friend and she's a great person, so I'm sorry she's not here, but hopefully she might make that in the future. So she's a good friend and ally and colleague. So the question is, what is underpinning harmful sexual behaviour? Just a really brief introduction to me. I spent 16 years in secondary in the West Midlands in Worcestershire, just sort of South Birmingham area, until about 2 years ago when I went full-time with Men at Work. And the reason for that was I just wanted to work with people who work with boys, or to work with boys and young men full-time, because I just felt that that's what I should have been doing. And I now train teachers, youth workers, social workers, anybody whose work brings them into regular contact with boys and young men, and perhaps also young adult men as well. Also, I deliver an adult domestic abuse perpetrator program in Manchester. It's like a 16 to 20 week program in liaison with Manchester Women's Aid. So I'm kind of working across the age spectrums, but I was 16 years in daily contact with teenage lads, and that was coincided with the advent of the internet and the advent of smartphone and all of the wonderful things that have come from that. But neither the internet nor the smartphone has invented anything new. The new configurations, it's an accelerant and it's an amplifier, but there's nothing new under the sun. So when we start talking about people like Andrew Tate, he's just one in a seemingly endless kind of cavalcade of unwelcome voices. So I'm going to talk with a bit of a focus on working with boys and young men, but hopefully you'll find that it's not exclusive in that way. So sexually harmful behaviours, sexual violence, it's not predestined. There are reasons. It comes from somewhere. Fundamentally, and it might seem like this is stating the blindingly obvious, for somebody to engage in sexually harmful behaviour, they have to have capacity to do that, physical capacity to do that. And on aggregate, males are on aggregate stronger and more powerful than females, and that is the story of humanity physically. But that doesn't necessarily, and should not necessarily correlate with X, Y, or Z. But we can clearly see that the vast preponderance of sexually harmful behaviours are committed by young men. It's just basic fact. And if we think otherwise, I think we kind of very quickly go off into the fog. So we've got the capacity, but capacity is not enough. We need to have the desire to do it, the will to do it. And where does that come from? Is it hardwired? No, I would suggest, and there's all kinds of evidence to suggest not. Why do some people choose to do it and some not? You know, there are reasons and there are choices and there are decisions. There's also profound cultural and social influence and emotional and psychological influence also on these bodies. That very crude picture of a sponge, not that the others are not crude diagrams as well, that sponge there is setting the scene for a conversation that I've had with hundreds and hundreds of teenage boys and now adult men as well, where, and hopefully I'm going to elaborate on that in a little bit. It's a way of approaching a conversation with young men, boys particularly, which is my main experience, which isn't pointing a finger. It's not asking, why do you think what you think? It's about, let's look at what the world has shown us. Let's look at what the world has told us. What lessons have we been given? And what have we been invited to enact? So it's not just the will or desire to do it. You have to have some kind of disinhibitors, because we are an empathetic and altruistic species. So there must be things present in the life of those who do sexually harmful behavior that disinhibit them. And I'm not just talking about alcohol and drugs. In fact, I'm not really talking about alcohol and drugs. I'm talking about beliefs and values and ways of seeing the world and ways of seeing oneself. The contexts have to arise, that's physically possible, but also contexts, a conducive context. We were talking about victim blaming just a moment ago. Tamsin was saying about that victim blaming and how do we respond to people who've been sexually assaulted? You know, that is a conducive context. If we know that you're likely to get away with things, or that the repercussions will be vague or long delayed, then that produces a conducive context in itself. A sense of entitlement that it's okay for me to do this. I'm allowed to do this, and if I can, I will. And dehumanization, the gradual viewing of groups of other people, and I'm talking primarily around the viewing of females by males as somewhat less than them, somewhat less than equal, and therefore, as part of the wider pictures of dehumanization, if we engage in that, or if we buy into it, then our behaviours are at an elevated risk. They just are, because we are not sensitive to the well-being or the rights of others. So it starts off really basic stuff. This thing is not floating around in the air. It's rooted in the material. Who does what to who and why? If we follow that line of questioning, we find that there is a huge body of facts. Who does what to who and why? Right, and what we'd like to do is create a culture. I'm sure all of us, everybody in the meeting today, and all of our colleagues and families and friends, what we'd like to do is impact upon a culture, create a culture which exists in small parts, but is not full enough, where that will and desire to do harm, that sense of entitlement to do harm, the conducive contexts and the disinhibitors and dehumanization and the power to do harm sexually are ever decreasing. That's what we want to be working towards. Easier said than done. But what do we do? And how do we do it? I'm just going to model a very small part of the training that I give to anybody who wants to work with boys and young men in a constructive way, and to avoid kind of knee-jerk, finger-pointy, antagonistic set pieces, because they don't work. In fact, they can be counterproductive, and we can re-entrench negative ideas, kind of thing that Tamsin was alluding to, that online influencers might be setting up our boys and young men to enact behaviours which are actually not in their interests at all, in a whole range of ways, not in the interests of their male peers, and certainly not in the interests of the women and girls around them, whether that's classmates, sisters, neighbours, or partners, sexual romantic partners. So the question is that I throw to people is, what are the problems and issues that arise in your work that stem from boys and young men acting out their understanding of what it means to be a man in ways that are not in the interests of them as individuals, not in the interest of their male peers, and not in the interest of, or are actively harmful of, the interests of women and girls around them. I don't know if anybody feels like putting something in the chat. It's just basically, what is it we're dealing with? What are we talking about? You know, can we bring it into reality? Obviously, I don't need to go into too much graphic detail or anything, but what is it we're talking about that, and maybe we need to start a step before harmful sexual behavior. I thought probably we do. What is it that some young men think is appropriate for them because they are young men and because they have an understanding of what that means? What is it that they are engaging in? What kinds of behaviors are they starting to enact which are not good for them? So I was just going to leave a minute's pause and just hopefully people can start to pop some things in there. And this might be something that's useful, perhaps in the recording or maybe sharing of notes. But what is it that 13, 14, 15, 17-year-old boys and young men are doing because they think it's what they're supposed to, or they're entitled to, or they have to do, and it's actually harming them? Then once we've pondered that, and if you've got a moment to stick anything in the chat, just expand that onto their male peers, the other young men in their circuit, whether they're actually their friends or their mates, or just other young men around. What's going on there because of this young man's beliefs? So we're thinking about ripple effect. We're thinking about radiation. He's absorbed some ideas and some models and some blueprints and templates, and then it's starting to move outwards.
Okay, Michael, we've got some comments here.
Okay, great.
It's not okay to cry or get upset, or
Right.
to be and that they have to be the protector of girls.
Right.
To make comments in a banterish way.
Right.
If it's a joke, it's fine. It's a joke, so it's fine. They can say what they want.
Mm-hmm.
TV, media, family relationships, and books influence those things.
Right.
Making comments and using slurs toward women or girls to appear big or powerful in front of their mates, and mocking others to assert their power.
Right. So there is very much a performative thread to that. So they are behaving towards women and girls in full sight or in the knowledge of their male peers. So women and girls are being, what's the word? It's not even not exactly weaponized, but the behavior towards women and girls is being weaponized as part of a social ordering between males, and vice versa. So that the triangulation of the three is really interesting. And that first thing you said, Bex, about it's not okay to cry. It's a banal truism. However, it's true that hundreds and hundreds and hundreds. I think I've spoken to maybe 1,200 young men over the last 7-8 years, and it is very much always mentioned, always. So it matters. It matters that it's there, deeply embedded. It is not so much necessarily about that some people cry more than others, even and perhaps would do even if there were no social pressure. It's the fact that you're not supposed to, and if you do, what does that mean? Who does it make you like? And what's the problem with being like that group of people? So it's kind of following the thread. This is a great conversation to have with teenage boys. I mean, I know some of you don't do much single-sex work, but I would say it's a good one to just to start the conversation. Start with the young man and see where it echoes outwards. How does it become a factor of the dynamic between the friends? You were talking about banter there, Bex. Banter is, wow, what a word. An exercise I've done with boys many times is they apply for the director of banter in whatever city or borough or county they're in. 100 grand plus car seems about reasonable. But then you think, well, what are the qualities? Let's get this going. What are the personal qualities of that? What do you need to be? And ultimately, it's about being quick-witted and smart and funny, etc. It's also about being cruel and being a very observant of other people's weaknesses. So it's really diving in. So we're thinking about boys, young men, born, boom. You just start being conscious. You're a material thing in a material universe. And what the hell do I do? What am I supposed to do this thing, which I'm getting bigger every day? I'm 6 months old, I'm 4, I'm 17, I'm going to be 40 and be 70 possibly. What do I do? Well, the world very kindly offers us all kinds of information and advice and obligations in our daily interactions, of course, but also in the deep roots, historically, ethnic, religious, political, geographic. We are deeply rooted in dense networks of expectations of how to be a boy and a man, whether we're in rural China or urban New York or Scottish Highlands, it's the same. There are expectations and rules, and that sponge soaks it up. It soaks it up from day one without filters. Earlier on, the younger we are, the fewer filters, and certainly as we get older, hopefully if we manage to regulate well and reach normal developmental milestones, we can start to apply filters. But early on, we don't. We just hear and we see and we feel what the world gives us. And it gives us a lot about how to be a man. So this question I throw back to the boys or young men in the room and say, well, where do you get the information from? Where does it come from? How do we find out how we're supposed to be a man? And hopefully, brackets, this is seen as not tangential to our reason for the webinar tonight about sexual violence, because hopefully it's seen as a steady introduction that leads inexorably towards in the moment conversation about that. So I ask boys, where does our influence come from? How do we find out what we're supposed to do as a man? And generally speaking, they say, well, from family, good, bad, big, small, traditional, non-traditional, whatever it may be. Really quickly, I think I've got about 16 other drops of information. Just feel free to stack them in the chat if you like. So other sources of information that boys are invited to absorb from day one, and they come from all kinds of directions. So family is obviously a big one, whatever that looks like, but all kinds of other places too. So do feel free to stick them in the chat and I'll slowly flick through.
I think these are going in the actually in the Q&A section.
So
peers
no
and
worries.
Peers and social media.
Social media, yeah, again, which can be broken down into particular ones. This is about creating a framework for exploratory collaborative conversations with boys and young men about something they are expert in, being a young man. They know, but we never ask them. We tell them off, but we need to know what is the fuel that is going in there? What is the diet? What has the world shown you, and how aware of it are you? Music videos. Easily spend an hour on that. School, but it's not just your friends in the playground or the teacher, it's what's in the curriculum. Who sorts out problems? Who's got the power in the school over and over? And is that a lesson that has been deeply learned? Language. Are there some words we use for boys and we don't use for girls? You know, things like feisty and stroppy and all kind of interesting stuff. You can really get digging in. Toys, books, jokes, fairy tales. Who kills a dragon who's stuck in a tower combing her hair because she can't find a door? Who is kissed while they're unconscious? Interesting. And kissed while they're unconscious. Unconscious is one of the leading genre on the climb in Pornhub. Unconscious. And you think, well, where does that come from? Well, interestingly enough, some of our most famous kind of romantic fairy tales have that kind of nugget and that seed in it. Adverts, role models, song lyrics, religion, whether we believe or not, other people do. It's deeply formative of the law of what sexuality is supposed to be approved or disapproved of. What's a family look like? Gaming, hugely influential, and porn, absolutely the de facto sex educator of a generation of young people. To an extent that never ever happened before. And sport and influencers, your Andrew Tates and all the others, the pickup artists, so many of them. Andrew Tate's just one of many, obviously. So that's the conversation with boys. Who's put this stuff in our heads? And then you can break it down and spend the time that you find appropriate, but it's picking out items of concern and expanding them. I often say to boys, what do you do with a sponge that's full of liquid? And they usually look at me like I'm mad. And so, well, what would we do if we find a sponge that was full of curious liquid? What might we do? Give it a squeeze, maybe. And so in terms of giving it a squeeze, let's see what comes out, and this is the conversation. And the reason for this is we have to engage, we absolutely have to engage our boys and young men in critical, reflective thinking about the messages that they are receiving from the moment they're born in what is essentially a patriarchal culture. They're drenched in expectations. We need to talk to them about them, I would say. We need to create the space. I'm not going to be able to say, in your lesson, do this, do that, do the other. This is broad cultural stuff. It's like, however you can in your setting, however we can in our own lives, it's creating the space for constructive conversations, because it's incredible how aware the boys can become over time, self-aware. And self-awareness is essential. So, thank you. Right, so in two terms, men should not. Now I say to the boys and I say to the people I train, this is not about you. Forget it, you can relax. This isn't what you think. Nobody's going to judge you at all. This is us listing what the world has put in here in that sponge. So very briefly, if you want to put anything in the chat or the Q&A or wherever you want to do it, write it on the desk if you want. What are the rules that you would expect 14, 15-year-old boy, if he's being self-reflective and critical and thinking about it, and he's gone through this process of all the influence, he's given it a squeeze, what do you suppose are going to be the top 5 or 6 rules? Men should.
We've got should not cry.
Right, so should not. Wait a minute, we're on the shoulds.
Oh, we're on the should. Okay.
Yeah. Let's go with
Okay.
should, and then we'll go should not.
Oh, should. Okay. All right. Men should be strong and fit.
Right. So there's a premium on physicality.
Providers.
Right. Yeah,
They should.
supremely important when we're thinking about what makes young men vulnerable to crime. The fact that some of them feel that they should be the provider it's a key element. We need to talk about it. County lines.
Protect his woman.
Yeah, the protect, keep, very fine line, isn't it? Yeah. Okay. Any others?
Be strong, be a leader, earn lots of money, be in charge.
Right, brilliant. I'm right there. Often when I'm talking with the boys or the trainees, I say, let's imagine there's another screen on the right and it says women rules. So logically, they're the opposite of everything we're saying for men. Because if they're just human rules or adult rules, they'd just be blurry and it'd be all of them. But they're not. They're very specific. These are rules for men, brackets, and therefore they're not rules for women. So therefore they have to be other. Right, let's see what the boys say. Be tough, make decisions, be sexually active, and then always look at them and say, who with? And they look at you like you're mad. Well, who are you supposed to be sexually active with? And then eventually they tend to say, well, we'll be girls. Oh, right, it's supposed to be straight. Sometimes he said, I'm not homophobic, so I didn't ask you. It's all right. It's not about you. We're asking about the world. What's the world put in here? How do we know if people are sexually active? In 2023, 2 year 9 boys, one's over there talking to his friends, telling them what he did with his girlfriend. The other year 9 boy is over there showing them. Who becomes a man? Who is afforded man status? The shower or the teller? It's kind of a rhetorical question. I'm assuming there's a kind of general agreement that it's the one who proves it. In 2023, pick so it didn't happen. So the technology and culture are becoming intertwined. Be the provider is fascinating. We can't do it now, we don't have time, but please do just spend a moment at some point of thinking, what is the difference between I think I should be the provider and I think I should provide? They're completely separate worlds. One of them is full of risk. The provider is full of risk to the young man himself, but also to those around him because of the fragile kind of power structure that requires it. Be good at banter. Oh gosh. Anyway, yeah, be good at banter. Have money power. Andrew Tate, effectively, what we're looking at here is all of these things. He's been conjured up by culture. There's nothing remotely interesting or novel about him. It's basically what boys have known forever. And should nots. Right, I'll be 1 minute and just finish on the should nots. So, what should we not do? And should not show emotions, but anger's okay. Don't need help.
Don't cry.
Absolutely.
Do anything like a girl.
Absolutely, which takes us to the next part, really, and I don't have time for this now, I don't know. It was just to give a glimpse of harmful sexual behaviours are underpinned by multiple ideas. Primarily, there is a basic axis of physical, and that boys and men are on aggregate stronger and have set up a power structure around that physical strength. But it's also like, it's in there because you could get two 14-year-old boys, two 18-year-old boys, young men, and they think entirely different things about women and girls and about what is appropriate and what is empathetic and about rights and autonomy. Why is that? It's because of what's in there. That is housed in the body, but it's kind of the response to cultural stimuli of all kinds. So opening up structured, empathetic, respectful conversations with boys and young men, I would suggest is a contribution towards an eventual lessening of incidents of sexually harmful behaviour. Because when we look at it and think, who does it mostly? It's mostly males. Who's the victim mostly? It's mostly females. Therefore, this is a story about how males see females. And now back over to Tamsin. Hopefully. Tamsin, are you there?
Sorry, I was actually whispering away to myself there. What I said was fascinating, and I'm sorry no one got to hear it. Yeah, I'm always frightened to look at my slide, because I'll make sure that when it's shared with people that there aren't any typos in it. This is what happens when we're emailing PowerPoints back and forth, isn't it? Thank you, Michael. And everything that Michael has said there, we get to have the really easy job of disseminating that in mixed sex groups first thing in the morning, particularly when your priority is geography. So, you know, what an easy task. So what I hope to outline here is just how you can start to embed some of the principles that Michael talked about and start to dismantle and disrupt some of these really pernicious messages which make life so difficult for boys and girls through a PSHE curriculum. And the good news is, only because it's the question I preempt, because this is always the first question Michael and I get, every single thing I talk about today, including the order in which I deliver it, is on the website that Michael and I have set up called Humanise.pro. So you don't have to make any resources. Everything I'm going to talk about now, including the outline, is on the site that we've set up together called Humanise.pro. And Bex, would you be happy to share with people as well, or if
Absolutely, yeah,
in the chat? But every single resource I'm going to refer to today is in there, and there's like a bank of not things that we've created, but just stuff that we find is particularly helpful. So really, this is about, if we want to work towards just dismantling young men's constructions of sex and sexual dynamics with girls, which is so harmful for boys and so harmful for girls, what we really need to do is undermine this. And I do find in my work with young men, they don't like being taken for fools. Young men don't like being played. And actually, when we explain how these things work to young men, they're actually very able to see how it's being played, which I think is one of the most helpful ways in terms of doing work around Andrew Tate. So the best way really is to go right back to basics. And this work starts when young people are really little, but of course the youngest children I work with are 11 years old. So if you work with boys and girls, for them to understand how gender works, the origins of historical gender roles, and how gender stereotypes, that even though, you know, men and women have equality in law, even though gender stereotypes still are so embedded in our society today. And I would actually say, and this is something that Michael works on as well in his 10 dialogues, I would actually say we're going backwards in terms of gender stereotypes. You know, that pink aisle, the blue aisle, the t-shirts, you know, the little princess, be kind, and the here comes trouble, you know, all of that kind of stuff. I actually see that we're going backwards. And I think it's very interesting when we look at the impact of porn. Young people who regularly engage in porn are more likely to believe that gender stereotypes are innate. And I think, you know, maybe that's something that kind of feeds into this as kind of a vicious circle. But if we can support young people to understand where gender roles come from and the emergence of related gender stereotypes, young people then can apply that across contexts. And it actually isn't very difficult. So supporting young people through kind of the conversations that Michael just outlined there, for them to understand, and it's based, of course, on the sex body, why traditionally have men and women had different roles, and actually thinking about early humans and how they used to work together, because actually humans are pretty amazing at working together. Men and women can work incredibly well collaboratively, but traditionally would have taken on different roles. But women, of course, absolutely would have gone on hunts, and men absolutely would have helped with child rearing. But when you look at what possible leaning in terms of gender roles, it would be based on our sex bodies. Men with their larger hearts and their longer, bigger, more muscle mass, and females being the people who actually carry babies and have babies and breastfeed and so on. Not that women didn't go on hunts, and men would have been hunting with babies strapped on their back, but women probably would have taken more on that caring role, having had babies and so on. And in fact, we do believe these early humans were actually very egalitarian and that work together very, very well. But we don't live like that, and I'm very, very pleased, because I would have been rubbish at it. But if you look at where gender stereotypes come now, and the belief in what men and women are for, which of course like the Taliban capitalise on, or Andrew Tate capitalise on, is based on those early traditional roles: man as provider, woman as carer. And if we look at what all of our gender stereotypes are based on, it's very much about going back to that. But in fact, what that then turned into through the Industrial Revolution and the feudal system, in which women, it was very much about controlling women's sexuality as the woman who would have the baby that would carry your name, and passing on of property through bloodlines, and men as the people who are able to own stuff. And before DNA testing, you know, if you want to know that your baby's definitely your baby, because they're going to inherit the stuff that you've accumulated, then the only way you can do that is by controlling female sexuality. So even at, a basic level, young people are definitely able to understand that because of different bodies, men and women took on different roles. When we were able to live in houses and own stuff, what was the only way you knew your baby was your baby? Well, to control what a woman did, where she went, how educated she was. And then as young people get older, you can then start to unpick how that still plays out in our society now. And it's also a very good way of understanding how Andrew Tate works, because that's actually exactly what Andrew Tate says in terms of men provider. And it looks quite nice, doesn't it? Men care for women, women precious flowers kept at home. But of course, one of the really nasty elements of this is, of course, how women are then treated if they're perceived as sexual. So just as, Andrew Tate, it's seen as, good women are the ones that your property, you own them, they belong to you, keep them at home, you provide for them. But we also then shame and punish women who are out about and perceived to be sexual. And once young people understand that really that's what it's about, they're able to understand what's going on in Afghanistan. They're able to understand, why FGM exists as a concept when they're older. And it's about controlling female sexuality. So that all sounds quite high order. Young people are absolutely able to understand that gender stereotypes come out of traditional gender roles. And these things are still created in the toys that we give children, the slogans that we put on t-shirts. Michael does really interesting work around birthday cards for children, but about girls being kind and quiet and pretty, and boys being strong and trouble and so on. But it does mean that then when we're starting to think about sexual relationships and young people and who they are and sexual identity, we then see these things played out in terms of girls having to walk a very, very fine line in terms of sexual, not too sexual, and young men feeling this pressure to be very, very sexual. So of course we're not going to go in like that when we're talking with year sevens, but in terms of unpicking these messages, that's when you can think about fashion and how fashion has changed over time. I think so fashion and clothing and toys, birthday cards, and any other way you can with quite young children to dismantle gender stereotypes. Because once they understand that it's all effectively made up and it's about the controlling of girls, well, it's made up and that it's not based on anything material, they can then start to apply that across different contexts. Now, year 8 is when I don't actually teach any RSE because I think it's a bit tricky. We've got some children age 12, some children age 13, and I think really interventions around RSE, it's best on a needs basis when they're in year 8. But what I do with my year 8s is start introducing the concept of exploitation. I think it's the key time to be talking about child sexual exploitation, but it means that you can also start thinking about how different bodies mean people are used in different ways. So in year 8, that's when I talk about county lines. A lot of children involved in county lines are also sexually exploited. But again, it's an opportunity to look at why is it that boys, whilst boys and girls are groomed for county lines, what is it about a boy and being part of that peer group? Because girls, a bit like what Andrew Tate has done, tend to be tricked into county lines using the lover boy method, in which they're groomed into thinking they're in an intimate relationship. Whereas boys are groomed into thinking they're part of a peer group and they've got a gang and a group of lads. So again, that's an opportunity where you can be thinking about gender stereotypes and unpicking it, and what makes us vulnerable to different behaviours based on gender stereotypes around how boys are meant to behave and how girls are meant to behave. So with my year 8, we've been looking at cannabis this week and talking about how cannabis is harvested by little children and how it's distributed through county lines. Again, just quite a low level because they're only year 8, but that of course is an age where they're very, very vulnerable to being groomed. I mean, although some children in county lines are as young as 9, but again, you're actually talking about gender stereotypes and what is it about being a boy that makes you very likely to go along with behaviours that are completely against your best interests. Now, year 9, I think most schools would say that this is the time when you do most of your targeted relationship and sex education. I always start the year by talking about sexual exploitation and then moving on to relationships. But starting with exploitation and then going on to RSE. And this is when I, for the first time, specifically talk about sexual assault and rape. So whilst young people are younger, and we've talked about consent in year 7, I will talk specifically around consent around Christmas time, and about young people going to parties for the first time, generally at friends' houses that they might not have been to before, and spending time with family they haven't seen in a long time. But that's more about holding hands and kissing and boundaries. But in year 9 and 10, this is the first time many young people get to talk about sexual assault and rape and sexual consent in school. And the way in which I deliver it is through what's called a porn critical lens. So whilst you're talking specifically around sex education, you're also drawing attention to how different it is to porn, and recognizing that what happens in porn is not representative of healthy sexual relationships. So that kind of, I start at the end of year 9, and then I move that and then into year 10, and then really talk. So it's more the relationship aspect in year 9, and then the sexual aspect in year 10. And then year 11, again, unpicking gender stereotypes, work around one punch can kill, addiction, particularly male mental health, eating disorders, including bigorexia and gambling. So when you look at that, that doesn't at all look as if it's around harmful sexual behaviours. We are, of course, talking about it specifically and explicitly when young people are in year 9 and 10, but it's about, and I like this phrase by Culture Reframes, the organisation, that the anti-porn organisation I work with, it's not about 1,000-minute conversation, it's 1,000 one-minute conversations in which you are dismantling and disrupting what young people have learned about what it is to be a man and what it is to be a woman. Why is it that men are supposed to be sexual, that men are supposed to be dominant, as Michael has outlined, but why also is it quite a dangerous thing for a young woman? Why is it that young women's sexuality is so closely controlled? Why do they then suffer language such as slag or hoe or whore, and so on? So hopefully this just gives you a bit of a flavour of how you can start to be a disruptor in your own classroom. Every single thing I've mentioned today is on the Humanise site, you know, under 7, 8, 9, 10, and 11. But I think because you've been bombarded with quite a lot of information today, perhaps at this point we open up to questions and see if we can offer support in a slightly more targeted way.
Just one thing at the moment, somebody has said that they can't see your website address in the chat.
I'll do it again.
It's I don't know whether the chat's been disabled. Chloe, if you could enable it for, I think it possibly has been disabled for I think it's just for hosts and panelists, isn't it? Oh, everyone.
Yes, it is. Sorry, yes.
Everyone. Yeah, okay. I'll pop it in there.
If you want, okay, I'll do that now.
I'm just doing it now.
Oh, sorry.
Humanise.pro. I think for me, for what I see around the school, one of the things that I think influences the male's behaviour is the fact that when I hear boys calling girls slag, or you know, pushing them around a little bit, and the girls just tolerate it. So there's no, I don't know whether they're tolerating it because they think it's okay, or whether they're tolerating it because they're too scared to sort of put some boundaries in place. I think there's an awful lot of work to do with all of our children, but especially with girls, to empower them to be able to put in place, actually, yeah, I know you're my boyfriend, but it's really not okay for you to push me, or to even have those conversations. Because when I have those conversations with a lot of the girls, they're like, oh, it's all right, it's my boyfriend, he didn't mean it, or it's normal, isn't it? Everyone uses the word slag, or he was only joking, it's just banter, miss. And so there's this almost resignation. I don't think it is a resignation. It's just a lack of understanding amongst our teenage girls that way of being treated is actually not acceptable. You know, and they see themselves being treated like that all over the place. Every time a woman is, even things like Jacinda Ardern, who has been an incredible leader of New Zealand, even the BBC sort of like dumbing down what she's done because she needs to take some time off because she's exhausted, you know, so like this impression that a woman can't run a country, and obviously it's exhausted her, when actually what she's done is made a really strong decision for herself and her family, having done an incredible job and left it in a really good place. That's not reflected even in our BBC media, which is supposed to be like completely impartial. So those influences come from everywhere. Some girls are resigned to it, but I think most just don't know how to react to it, have not been empowered in how best they can challenge that kind of behaviour.
Are you happy for me to start off, Michael? Is that all right?
Yeah, for sure.
I think there are two things going on. First of all, that this behaviour is just so utterly normalised, as you say, it's just completely normalised. Three things going on. And the second one, the stakes are really high. So to be able to challenge your partner, and I don't know if I could have done that at 14, 15, that's a very, very, very high stakes behaviour. You risk, it's reputation, you risk violence, you risk sexual assault, you risk being told that you've humiliated them, maybe if there are other people around, that the stakes are very, very high, and that maybe that's an interesting activity you could do with the class. But I also think as well, when we talk about what people do under stress, we only really focus on what blokes do. So if we think about the different responses in terms of fight, flight, freeze, flop, women often friend. They just kind of go along with it in like a really nice way. We're cool about things, aren't we? We're really cool about it. And it is a stress response, and it can actually keep you alive. Whilst it is an 18, it's been quite helpful having so many of my young men have watched Dharma. The first episode is horrific. Yeah, fawn. Yeah, thank you, Michael. But the first episode of Dharma, which is absolutely horrific, it's all in one room, and that this man is trying to get away from Jeffrey Dahmer, the serial killer and cannibal. But it's been very useful for so many of my young men to have seen it, because they actually see how the victim tries to seduce Dahmer to try and stay alive in that moment. So I mean, that's quite an extreme example, but people do it, and it's drawing young people's attention to it.
No, absolutely, and that sort of segues into, I was just going to refer to, if you're brought up surrounded by unhealthy relationships, and we're looking at what 1 in 4, 1 in 5 of our young people might well be doing that, whether it's physical or emotional, psychological abuse. They've already learned that to survive you have to do a certain list of things, and in fact that's the whole point of porn. Ultimately, you look at porn in its totality, it's to teach men what to do and to teach girls what will be done. And I think that's profoundly sad. I think that's profoundly important. And it is really incredible. You look like historically on a line of access to the kind of pornography where people being spat at, beaten, and the whole shooting match is profoundly depressing stuff. It's basically most of human history, and then that and that is the last 10 years. It's just extraordinary. I'm getting a lot of calls from primary now for training because of exactly that article that you showed, Townsend, and that from The Guardian. Yeah, hearing it a lot. It's shocking, but not surprising, because that is the script that we're offering by design or default our children to learn about sex. It's that is it. That hundreds of billion-dollar criminal enterprise with a fundamental kind of objective of teaching one half of the world how to treat the other, and therefore teaching the other half of the world what to expect and what is normal, so that you don't resist. It's terrifying propaganda, effectively, but we don't tend to look at it through that lens of propaganda, but it is, and it's bloody effective, unfortunately, which is why we need to set up the resistance. In a way, that's using a kind of a Star Wars theme there, but yeah, I mean, that's who's teaching our kids about sex. It
is almost a form. It's a form of radicalization, isn't it?
100%.
It's lots of training around radicalization in terms of religion and culture, but actually this is a form of radicalization of our young men into giving them a sense of belonging. Well, it's the classic, isn't it? A young man who's feeling kind of a bit lonely, a bit left out from society in some way, has found, an Andrew Tate or an influencer whose values kind of align, and he feels part of that group, and he's got something to fight against, and it's a classic mode of inciting, those young people into that kind of belief system. One of the questions on here is, how do you handle best the questions from kids when you are challenging the ideas that they have at home, that they've learned from home, how would you handle those situations?
I was in the
Yeah, I've been doing it 15 years now, and I have learned there are certain phrases that I use, and I do believe them actually. I don't just say them because they support young men to get on side, but it is mostly women doing this work, and we have to be realistic about that dynamic as well. But I always start any scheme of work around relationships and sex education saying that no one comes to our lessons deserving to be attacked on the basis of their sex, and no one is being accused of anything. We're on everyone's side. I actually quote Michael, this is about making everyone, male or female, feel safe and safe to be around. So I'm quoting Michael there, that if they ever feel attacked, they must let me know, because I'm there for them. And I put in precursors like that, and I do mean them. Actually, I do talk about sexual assault against men. I actually start with who is most likely to be the victim of a violent crime? Does anyone know, by the way, who is most likely to be the victim of a violent crime in the UK? Any guesses? Go on, Michael.
young men.
It's only men. It's only young men. Yeah. And who's most likely to be the perpetrator?
Yeah.
Who's most likely to be the perpetrator, Michael?
Me again. Young men again.
It's only a bloody young man. There we are. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's fine. And we'll talk about those things, and we will talk about those things, which is why we're going to talk about one punch can kill, and we will talk about those things. But right now, we're talking about something very, very specific. And in order for everyone to be safe and everyone to have healthy relationships, we've got to talk about it in an accurate way. And just because when we talk about men, of course, we're not talking about all men, but we all live in this society. And it's actually the minority of men do the majority of crime. But we are all part of dismantling this, and we all play a role in that. So that's how I start my lessons, and it hasn't half made life a lot easier. I also make time to check in with all of the young people, just in terms, do you feel it's going okay, you're comfortable, all of those things that we do. And they quite often stop for a chat at the end of the lesson as well. But that has really stopped the challenging things. I think bouncing questions back, like, so for example, it's very, very rare that these days, if I get things around, women lie. I mean, Michael will, if you can, Michael, the stats around far more likely to be accused of far more.
Oh yeah. Men are. I think it's. Oh gosh, I think it's
320.
I thought it was 230, or was it 320? It's in the hundreds. I think it's 230 times. Men are 230 times more likely to be raped by another man than to be accused of rape by falsely accused of rape by a woman. This is just fact.
Yeah. So that's
having these facts in the conversation can be real game changers. Otherwise, it's all left kind of vague. But that's kind of Channel 4 fact checker actually is a good source for that, because I think myth busting is a really important thing, because myths are part of the dehumanization process and the desensitization process. So the easier it is for us to demythologize and puncture them with just straight recourse to fact, and sort of engage and say, well, it's really good they're having this discussion, and obviously we all want to be fact-based. Yeah, well, let's go and find some facts and bring them in, not something you find on YouTube, but things that are kind of got collective societal endorsement as a source of veracity. And yeah, I mean, and also myths around what was she wearing, around the victim blaming things. There's a fantastic mobile exhibition in the States called What Was She Wearing? I'm going to presume some of you might have heard of that. Actually seem to be familiar with it.
I think I've actually seen a similar one at one of the big museums in London, and it's frightening. It's like,
oh yeah,
PE kit and t-shirt and jeans, and I was wearing a towel as I came out of the bathroom in my friend's house, those kinds of things. So
absolutely. And nurses' overalls and workwear, absolutely. And it's really, because it brings it into it demythologizes, certainly with Andrew Tate. And if you're walking around late at night in a short skirt, what do you expect? The fact is, it's about power. And also, I talk very frankly with boys about male sexual assault in prison, where everybody's just wearing the same gear. It's nothing about clothing whatsoever. It's entirely and only about power. And I know we're kind of running out of time here, but I'm happy to correspond, if anybody wants to correspond, I'm sure Tam's in as well, do visit Humanise, and there's a contact email there. It's a massive set of conversations. I think the most important thing is that we are not overwhelmed by the doom and the gloom, which is clearly visible, because some of that is about 3 conversations away from never having happened in the first place. You know, it's about creating a different culture. But in my belief it's we have to look at who does what to who and why, and be absolutely fact-based about that. And if we kind of get blurry, we can't do that anymore. So yeah, eyes on facts, evidence.
Okay. So somebody's put the reference to it's Dove that's done the What You're Wearing exhibition as the Dove Centre. Can you recommend any good SEND resources to help teach these subjects? For example, symbol text resources for pupils with SLD, speech and learning difficulties.
We have, so my lessons, everyone's taught in it's a mixed ability group, and then I organise, so at my school we have a school nurse who visits and delivers lessons, and I just arrange for things to be delivered in a smaller group in our SEND area. I'll be really honest, it's not my area of expertise, but it was something I will explore, and then we'll put it on the Humanise website.
Okay, brilliant. And there was another question here. Any recommendations for external speakers to come into school to speak about sexual harassment with a range of year groups and give staff training?
No, it's you're the people, and they'll also come to you. I reckon I met Michael when he did training at my school, so I'll always recommend Michael's work, because it's about disruption and it's about dismantling. And really, it's not really about harmful sexual behaviour, it's about all the other stuff underneath. So I can't recommend Michael's work enough, but it's about you as individuals, and well, the problem is, if you have someone who's kind of airlifted in, then they're out, and then who are the people left? So the young people have got all of this stuff, and then where have they gone? So it's about you as the staff. Sorry, that probably isn't the answer that you wanted. No. I don't have external speakers coming to my school.
No, Sam said that was the last time I ever worked directly with boys. It was 2 years ago. And it's because I fundamentally believe that the model is wrong. The external speaker model is a method of extracting finance from schools and leaving no legacy whatsoever. So I'm 100% only do training for professionals now, because professionals are stuck doing it every day. They're there. And also we see young people at different times in their emotional life, and we know their family, we know their friends, we know their ups and downs, and we know them. People who come in and sit 200 kids in an assembly and get £1,000 for an hour, or £2,000 for half a day, whatever it might be, they're just strangers. They're strangers. I don't think, unless you are literally a titan of the spoken word, like, I don't know, I can't think of some famous historical figure, what are you going to do in a couple of hours, really? You know, I think it's a business, and I think it needs to stop. I think we need to support our teachers to do everything that that they are almost doing anyway, because they're there doing the stuff. But that's not very popular, obviously, amongst people who make money from doing that sort of thing. And I make a living from training teachers, but I train teachers. I don't just come in and talk to boys, because that's nuts. Personally, I just speak as directly as I think I should do.
I think that's one of the reasons why I set this network up, really, was to be able to provide support on specific different topics within the PSHE and RSE curriculum, because we don't have teams in schools. We might have one person who is in charge of it, and then a team of tutors or non-specialist teachers. So it's about providing that support and that empowerment to think, actually, I'm already doing the right thing, I'm already there, or I'm going to take, the hope is that for each of these webinars that everybody takes away just one small thing that they can change about their teaching practice, or about how they deliver to their teachers, or put in place in a lesson that is useful to them, that makes their life in some way easier, or their teaching in some way more effective.
Absolutely.
I think that's where we are with that.
Yeah, no, it's great. Peer support is fantastic. I'm afraid I do have to leave. I've got to go to Manchester, and I'm in Worcester. So so I've got to get a train. I've personally got to bail out. I'm really sorry to do this, but thank you very, very much. I'm gonna have to close because I'm operating the share screen thing. If I close that, I mean, I'm not going to break the meeting, am I? I don't think.
I don't think so. I don't think so. I think we're a couple of, thank yous from people.
Thank you.
I'll have a look, and obviously people can contact you directly through your website now. And yeah, thanks, Michael. Really, like, I'm going to watch this back. I've got like notes on my pad and they're all over the place. I'm going to watch it back, and this will be beneficial for my teaching as well. So thank you.
Well, we're all in touch now. That's amazing. Yeah, that's good.
Lots of thank yous on here. So brilliant.
Thank you very much. Okay.
All right.
All the best.
Thank you. Okay. Yeah, just lots and lots of thank yous from people on there. There were some questions we didn't quite get to. Hopefully, if you contact Tamsin and Michael directly, if there's something specific that you wanted, or resources that you wanted. But I can vouch for having gone onto the Humanise website and had a look at the list of resources and things that you've got on your route through, and the rationale behind why you teach things in that way. It makes absolute sense. And hopefully, I think it would address that issue with that parents are having about, oh, I don't want my Year 7 student learning about sexual assault. Well, actually, we're not teaching them about that. We're teaching them about all the other things that lead up to that situation that may occur in later life. So absolutely brilliantly. Just lots and lots and lots. How are we going to get the slides and things like that? They'll be put in the Google Drive.
An edited version with my typos removed.
They are, the recording will be put onto our webinar, our YouTube channel. Unfortunately though, because Michael has gone, I cannot advertise the last, our last webinar of the year is on the 27th of June. It is from 4 till 5. It's a Tuesday again, and I am absolutely delighted that we can now have our What Are Ofsted Expecting webinar, which was supposed to happen in January, but unfortunately Rory Pownell has been very poorly, and Polly Haste, Dr. Polly Haste, who is taking, Rory retires in May, and so Polly is taking over from him, and she is coming to present on the 27th of June regarding what are Ofsted's expectations and how have things changed in the last 12 months. So that's a really exciting webinar to have on the 27th of June. Okay. And I think with that, how do you ensure you get an invite for the next webinar? Lovely Chloe will send all that information out to anybody that has ever applied for tickets for our webinars. You will we will bombard you now. You will have information every time there's a webinar because you've been on one. Okay. Yeah,
That's right. So if you sign up to one, you're in the gang for life.
You're in the gang for life. Yeah. Okay. I think we're good. Okay. Thanks so much, everybody. And yeah, have a great rest of the week.